Hey there, folks. Um, we're inside today for this particular video because I wanted to kind of try and get this one done and then perhaps do the next one when I take the dogs out in a bit. So, yeah, we're inside. It's lovely outside actually, although there's Hayden. He's, as you can see, nice and cozy. And Scotia's there, nice and cozy. And it's an absolutely, glorious day. Actually, it's gone a bit cloudy now, but it's actually glorious outside. But I don't get any sun that shines sort of in the flat here because it's in the wrong place in the sky, obviously, for the time of year. So I thought I'd do this one. I thought I'd do this little video inside. And I want to talk about my mother. And then I was sort of hoping maybe I'll do my father later, but I want to talk about my mother, and I want people to realise that I may get emotional when I talk about her, when I talk about any of this stuff, and you'll probably see me cry a lot because this morning I was went over to Tesco's to get some treats for the cat, and met a dear lady that I know. She lives just round the corner here, and I was talking to her, and we were just chatting about stuff, and I just ended up tears streaming down my face, and this happens a lot to me. It's bizarre because I never used to feel anything in the past at all, but I can just cry, but it wasn't tears of depression or negative tears. It was tears of, how can I describe it? Being able to feel, pain and emotion and empathy, and it just, and I can't contain it, and it just comes out, and just, yeah, that's just me at the moment. So I've had quite an emotional sort of morning. I've been dancing, and I dance. That's one thing I do when I praise God, and I dance and I sing, and it's just amazing. That's an amazing release for me. But yeah, so I will get emotional. I do feel it when I talk about stuff, obviously. But when I talk about my mum, because I did refer to her as mum, um, I'm kind of telling her story from my perspective. Obviously, I can't tell it from my brothers and sisters' perspective because, they've got different views of how they feel or felt at the time. But I can only tell my story about my mum, our mum, from my perspective, from what I experienced with her growing up. Each one of my brothers and sisters are going to have a different opinion. Yeah, they're going to see things differently. There's a lot of things that my brothers and sisters have filled me in on when we've spoken about things that I didn't know, and some of which shocked me, some of which I already knew. But I'm telling my story about my mother today as it affected me personally, as a child, and how I saw her. As I say, my brothers and sisters may see her differently, but this is my story, and it's her story, and it's my story of my mother. Although she's our mother. So yeah, I might cry, but I'm not attached to the pain of the whole past. I weep now with genuine emotion, genuine tears, because one, I know I'm going to meet Mum again one day, because I believe that, and I just know that. I know that. But because I weep also over, I can accept everything that happened in my childhood now, because I know that she wasn't capable or able to, be the mother that, ideally we would all have wanted. And so, but she was my mother, and this is my my story about, who I think she was, which is the important thing. So this is the only, well, no, it's not the only picture I've got of her. She was an incredibly beautiful woman. And that picture, I believe, was taken when she was married to my eldest brother's father. So, yes, beautiful woman there. I certainly don't take after her, do I? She laughs. No, I accept that I'm beautiful in my own way. But she was, I mean, I'm going by stuff she's told me, stuff that I, knew about her, that she used to talk to me about for many, many hours, many years later. But she was born into a wealthy family. I would say she was, I guess, she was upper class. It wouldn't have been middle class. It would be upper class. I mean, her family, she was born into an acting family. As I said previously, my grandfather was in the Archers. He was the first Walter Gabriel in the Archers, my mother's father. But he also was a newsreader, I believe, for the BBC for many years, for radio. And they knew lots of, actors and actresses. And my mother used to say that, she can remember, loads of people, celebrities of the day, they would come to her parents' house, and they had nannies. So you can imagine, she said that she would be sort of summoned down to, meet the guests before dinner, and then she was swiftly removed and sent back up where, she wouldn't be seen or heard, because they kind of had the attitude that children should be seen and not heard. So she had an incredibly lonely childhood herself. I believe my grandmother went to the Royal Academy of Music and played the piano. And so she was born into a family that was, used to entertain all the time. And as I say, they had servants. What a thing, hey. When I came along, I was born, we lived in a council house. So, it was a world away from what I've ever experienced. But she told me that she never experienced affection from, her parents, from her mother, from her father. They didn't, they weren't affectionate. They didn't hug their children. she was, you know, very lacking in being loved as a kid. And, you know, so that must have been particularly awful. She told me stories of how she was terrified, because obviously they had guests that stayed, you know. I mean, my mother's side of the family come from Lancashire, and they've got their own family crest, family home, coat of arms, and the family name is the only spelling of that name in, you know, in the world, I believe. So yeah, so she was born into money, you know. So I believe that she obviously was sent away to school, obviously to boarding school. I don't know if she sort of went to finishing ladies' college or anything like that, but she certainly grew up without any love whatsoever. So she said her father, my grandfather, obviously, that I never met, they discovered that she was kind of, I suppose, as a young child, as young children do, they sort of examine their bodies, you know, and little boys play with their willies, don't they? And you know, and girls, you know, they explore. And apparently her father had caught her doing this. So rather than, you know, sort of talk to her, she was never taught about sex education or, you know, periods or anything like that. There was no one to teach her those things. So so to stop her from doing this, she said that he, you know, put a pair of white gloves on her as a little child, you know, however old she was, and just told her not, you know, not to do it. Horrendous, really, isn't it? And the other horrific thing that she told me in her childhood was that obviously they used to entertain and have loads of guests staying, you know, at the house, at the mansion or whatever that they lived in. And she was terrified to go to the bathroom in case, you know, they heard her sort of, you know, going to the toilet. And so she would actually, you know, actually wrap her toilet in, you know, tissue paper, toilet paper or whatever they had back then, and put it in a dresser drawer in her bedroom because she was terrified that they would hear her actually going to the toilet. I mean, can you imagine that as a child? Yeah. So, you know, her parents never hugged her. They never showed her affection in that sense. I mean, she was sort of shown off. She was, she had two other sisters, and a brother, and I think they were all abused emotionally in that sense that they weren't loved. They were neglected emotionally, which is one of the biggest, you know, which is one of the biggest things, isn't it? Being neglected emotionally. They reckon that's, you know, almost as worse as the whole caboodle, in the abuse terms, because it's your head, it's your mind, it's awful. So anyway, she because my grandmother used to entertain and throw parties, and I believe the war, obviously we were going into the war years, and I think my mother said that her mother moved sort of around the country, and she used to buy up cottages and old properties and things, and then do them up, sell them, and then move on somewhere else. So my mother was actually born in Golders Green in London, although they were from Lancashire. But obviously she ended up in the Cotswolds through, you know, her mother moving or whatever. So she, because my grandmother entertained and they had parties and would have, they had lots, they entertained, officers and military men that came because, my grandmother threw parties, and so my mother was introduced to my oldest brother, his father. And as I say, bearing in mind that, the Second World War, was about to kick off or had kicked off. These there were lots of sort of military men and officers and things that used to come and, have parties. And I mean, obviously they were sort of looking to, to hook up, find future husbands and wives. So my mother was introduced, and she ended up obviously marrying my oldest brother's father. And then not too long after that, and she told me she was in love. She loved him. She loved him. She loved him. He was the most amazing man. She told me stories of, quite personal stuff, but it was obvious that she adored him. He was a wonderful man. He was a wonderful man. And everything she spoke about him was just oozing love, and so of course she was over the moon, wasn't she? She was newly married to an officer. I believe he was an officer in the army. Of course he was. Yes, he was an officer in the army. And of course he had to go over on D-Day, and do his bit for the country, and so he said goodbye to her before he left. I'm going to get emotional, and he's not even my father, but he said goodbye to her, and obviously went off, and they didn't know, officially, but my mother was pregnant with my eldest brother. And so, but she said that before he left, he said to her, "Look after my son." And he didn't even know that she was carrying my brother. Anyway, he went and he survived D-Day, but he got killed shortly after that. And obviously she received the news that, the message that came through the door to thousands of families and wives, sisters, and the families of all those that were killed. It was horrendous. And my mum, obviously received the news that he'd fallen in battle. And so he was, I don't know what the arrangements were, but it obviously his body wasn't brought back to this country, so he was left in France, laid to rest in France. But so there was my mother, pregnant with my eldest brother, and you can imagine obviously the devastation that she would have felt, gone through. And she said to me that her mother, my grandmother, didn't give a damn. Didn't, she was responsible for introducing my mother to my oldest brother's father. But when when he was no longer there, my mother needed the help of of her mother, and I don't know if her father was still alive then. My grandmother was useless, didn't do a thing, didn't help her. So basically, she was kind of left on her own with a baby. It must have been horrendous, to be honest. So that was the situation, and then obviously she was devastated, obviously, but it was again through my grandmother, this wonderful grandmother, that's another story that I'll go into at another time. But my mother was left, but my grandmother introduced my mother then to another officer, military man, because, again, entertaining officers would come and, have drinks and dinner parties. And so my mother was introduced to the man who then became my mother's second husband, because she married him, obviously. And she had my two sisters and my brother, another brother. And I believe that I don't really want to go into the story of him, because I didn't know him. I never met him. And in respect to, obviously, my brother and my two sisters, he wasn't my father. I wasn't there. So I can only go by, stuff that mum told me. But she never, she didn't slag him off, or it wasn't like that. But she had all these children, obviously, but she was looked after financially by